Good evening, everyone. Welcome to season 3, episode 21, the season finale of the P.W.P Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Noelle Figueroa. Thank you for joining me this evening. Tonight's guest is fellow poet Ray Cicetti, and we're going to just dive right into the conversation. Now, for those of you not already familiar with this podcast, the P.W.P Sessions, or the Poets with Purpose Sessions podcast, is a podcast I created where I interview new or established authors of poetry, rappers, or MCs, and I feature a performance of their work along with an audience Q&A session. I'm your host, Noelle Figueroa. I am a poet, author, blogger, workshop facilitator, and event host, and I am the creator of the P.W.P Sessions podcast. Tonight's guest is Ray Cicetti, and this is his bio. Ray Cicetti's poems have been published in a variety of journals, including the Galway Review, Platform Review, Deep Wild Journal, Stillwater Review, and River Huron Review. Also the chapter, A Journey Towards Awakening, Self-Relations and Mindfulness in the book, Walking in Two Worlds, published by Zaid, Tucker, and Thiessen. His first book of poems, A Forest in His Pocket, was published in 2020 by Finishing Line Press. His second book, Songs of Love and Longing, was published in 2023 by Blue Jade Press. He has been a featured poet at various reading series. Ray is also a psychotherapist in private practice and senior teacher at the Empty Bowl Zen community in Morristown, New Jersey. He lives in northern New Jersey with his wife, Carolyn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Ray Cicetti. Hey, Ray, good evening. How are you?
Well, good evening, Noel. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it very much.
Yes, excellent. Thank you for being my guest. So I'll start off with a basic question. Who is Ray Cicetti? How would you describe yourself or define yourself?
Well, it's a good question. I think that one of the ways I would define myself to say I'm a person who is deeply curious about life and the world around me. And I think also somebody who sees relationships as important and service to others as being very important. I hope to live that out, So I guess if there are any qualities that I would say, those probably are the ones that are most important to me and how I like to define myself, I suppose.
Yeah, excellent. Now, all poets, have their own reasons for, or their own reasons, or I should say, or I can also say their own experiences as to how they get into poetry. How did you get your start into poetry?
Well, one of the things that I think was the leading cause was my own practice in the Zen Buddhist tradition. There's a long history in the Zen Buddhism of relationship with the arts, whether it's calligraphy, haiku, painting, things like that. There's even the Zen art of archery, things like that. There's a variety of different arts that were coordinated and as a way of complementing one's practice by doing some artistic endeavor. And so when I began to practice in the Zen tradition, that was part of it. I started reading poetry, I started reading haiku. A lot of the poets who were interested in Zen, I started getting curious about. And just in some bold way, decided to try my hand at it, So that's kind of how it began for me,
Mm-hmm. And like in those early stages of your writing, what were the first subjects that you tackled?
Well, myself. I started looking at who I was, and if I was kind of living the life that I thought I was living, and to see where the gaps were and where I was falling short. And so I began to explore myself first, and the world around me. I mean, the literal world around me, thoughts and memories, and my growing up. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, in the North Ward. And some of the writing I did was about my family and my relationships with them, good or bad. And it was a way of kind of expressing myself and exploring myself and looking at the relationships that we had with each other in my family. Yeah. You know,
What would you say motivates you as a poet and a writer? Every poet has their own thing or things that motivates them to write. What would you say your motivations are?
I would say it's primarily about relationships. Relationships not just with people, but with the world. Relationship with trees, relationships with birds, relationships with anything that surrounds my life, you know. And I began wanting to, again, be curious about those things and see them more clearly and see the value that they had for me, not just ignoring them but looking more deeply at the world around me and getting really interested in what it had to offer me, you know, what it had to offer us, I guess,
Wow,
you know.
excellent.
So that's a part of it. I think
Mhm.
the sitting practice for me, the meditation practice for me, was probably the single most important piece for me wanting to start exploring things in a new and interesting way. And poetry was one. Of course, I tried other things too. I tried my hand at a shakuhachi flute, which didn't go very well, actually. But I tried my hand at shakuhachi flute, and I tried my head at drawing and things like that. But the poetry really came to me more clearly and directly, more naturally, I think. You know,
And who or what would you say helped you to develop your skills as a writer? Was there any
uh,
was there any like specific books or teachers, for example?
some of the old Chinese poets was one. I started reading them. Isa, Basho, Tufu, all the great old haiku poets who were wandering in the mountains and writing about their experience. Um, and I started being interested in that because they were so beautifully observant of the world. And so that kind of was the first move. And then I went to some other poets. Mary Oliver interested me. Some of the poets who were writing, some of the beat poets um, who were writing in the 50s and 60s. Kenneth Rexroth, Ezra Pound, people like that, Gary Snyder, people like that, who were really developing an eye for the world and their relationship in it, you know. It really kind of, you know, lit me up, you know, in a wonderful way, you know. So I think that was the beginning of it for me. A fellow named Robert Haas, who was one of the poet laureates of the United States, also is an influence, I think. Those kind of people.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. Now you stated in your bio that you're a psychotherapist, and
Oh yeah,
I like to touch on that for a few minutes because as I'm sure you're aware, mental health is a very hot topic at
yes,
this point in time.
yes it is.
And I like to ask you, from your experience and in your personal opinion, how does poetry play a role in mental health? Well, we can start with your mental health. Like how important is it to
I
you
don't think you want to
that
talk about my mental health. That'd be a long conversation, man.
well, what I'm driving at is, we all need some kind of outlet to help navigate, the times that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
Um, how would you say creativity has played a role in, helping you to keep a positive state of mental health?
for myself, you mean?
Yes.
Well, you know, I think one of the things I mentioned a little bit earlier is I became much more curious about myself and the world, and I began to look at that more closely. And uh, it was the way I viewed myself started to shift. It became more open as I became more creative. That there were, for example, parts of me that I had neglected that I didn't want to neglect anymore because I found them more interesting. Whether they were conceived as positive parts or negative parts didn't matter. Everything started to have a sense of value, in other words. My anger had value. My sense of grief had value. My joys had value. My disappointments had value. So all of a sudden, I felt I could be more inclusive, even to the difficulty, neurotic stuff. I was like, it was okay to say hello to them, as I like to say, and see what they had to offer. So there was that kind of softening and opening that started to happen. And part of that was a creative sensibility that said, there's value here. You know, what have I shut down about myself in terms of my own mental health that maybe I want to go back and revisit? So everything was open as possibilities, you see, for growth. Rather than feeling like in the old days where I had to keep certain things in exile and other things were okay. Now, all of a sudden, the gates were open. And that really benefited me and probably benefited my marriage as well. I think my wife would tell you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, in terms of your patients, is poetry something that you incorporate into your practice? Is that something that you're at liberty to say?
Well, yeah, I can say that, sure. Well, in the past, I think I used it more directly. So, for example, if I felt that there was a particular poem that would help somebody, sometimes I would bring the poetry into the session and I would offer it to my client and say, let's read this, you know, or try reading this and see, does this speak to you? You know, I put some poems in my waiting room so that people would come in, and when they sat in the waiting room, if they were curious, they might read a poem. That was one of the ways I did it. Otherwise, I don't bring it in directly. I think it's just being more poetic in the way I relate to people, you know, and I offer that to them, that if I think through my own creative process of being more open and inclusive, I try to bring that mindset to them too, that they can be curious about what they have tried to kill off in themselves. Let's bring it back and look at it. Maybe there's some value there. See? So I try to set that kind of consciousness in the sessions as well. Everything is up for exploration, even your worst nightmare. Let's take a look at it. It's okay. So people feel, I think, more accepted, that they could talk about these things, and it's all right.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Now, I'd like to congratulate you on your 2 book releases. In terms of your first book, can you share with our audience your inspiration for putting that first book together and describe the process of it?
Sure. When I first started getting interested in poetry, I went to a workshop. A wonderful poet named Adele Kenny. Great poet herself. She lives here in Jersey. I went to a workshop about writing, and through the day, we all, of course, as well as learning about writing poetry, we had to write one. We had to write a poem. So I wrote a poem, which was very whimsical. It was about a young boy becoming a cherry tree, which I thought was beautiful. And because when I was a kid, growing up in Newark, we would go to the cherry blossom festivals that were in Branchbrook Park when I was a kid. And so I had that memory and wrote a very whimsical poem about a cherry tree. And when we were finished and I read it, Adele Kenny, who I greatly admire, said, you know, you have something here in your writing, and I would urge you to continue doing it. A sense of whimsy and playfulness, as well as sharing something important, you know. So that was kind of the introduction for me to start my first book. And I started working with Adele over a period of a couple of years to bring her poetry and look at them with her so she could teach me. And then the more we did that over time, she said, you know, I think you have material here that would be a good first book. So she was a great mentor and encouraging me. That's kind of how I started. And the first book is very whimsical. There's a lot of fun stuff in there, which was calling me at the time, you know.
Now, between, do you have a preference in terms of working with a publisher, as opposed to being self-published? Like, do you have a preference, or do you prefer either method? Like, what is there a way that you're more comfortable or preferable to you?
It's a good question, you know. I like the idea of working with a publishing house, because I liked working with other people. And I felt like you can get lost by just doing it all yourself. You know, you never know where you're stuck. You never know what could be better. There's no relationship. There's no dialogue other than with yourself. So I like the idea of working with a publishing house and with an editor who wanted to try to support me in my work, but was also telling me when something wasn't good enough, which I thought was valuable. Well, gee, Ray, she would say, you could strengthen this poem a little bit more. Why do you have that line in there? What if we took it out? I think this would make a better poem and a better book. So I like that kind of back and forth, you know. The first book was with Finishing Line Press, and the second one I went with Blue Jade. I had a great relationship with the editor there named Rebecca, who was very helpful in terms of not just the poetry itself, not just the poems themselves, but the placement of the poems. Why and where and how do you place a poem, and for what reason? What's the arc of the book, in other words? So she was bringing up things that I never even thought of. And I thought I think it's very helpful to work with a publisher and a good editor in terms of a book, you know. Yeah.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
what subjects have you recently tackled with your poetry?
Well, you know, the second book, which is called Songs of Love and Longing, is, I think, very different from the first one. I mean, the first book, the title is A Forest in His Pocket. And there is a poem in the first book, which is called A Forest in His Pocket. So you can see the whimsy in that and the playfulness in that. This second book, I wanted to go in a different direction, and Songs of Love and Longing were, I thought, two of the most important human qualities, love, longing, or loss, that I wanted to try to speak to. So I tackled both of those, and in the book, I almost alternate them. You know, one poem is about some aspect of love. There are other poems in the book that are about loss and longing and grief, because I felt they were one of the two most important human issues and struggles that we have. And I wanted to speak to that a little bit. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Is there any one subject that you like writing about more than others, or do you feel that you write whatever it is you're feeling at the moment?
Well, sometimes I get an inspiration, you know, something comes to me, right? You know, I could be sitting outside or eating a cannoli, or watching TV, or washing the dishes, or reading a poem, or reading a book, or even listening to music, you know, and so a line might come, or something interesting might come. So sometimes it comes through that kind of inspiration. It comes out of nowhere. There are other poems that are based about my own history, growing up in an Italian-American family in Newark. Poems about my father, poems about my grandmother, my mom, and teaching me how to cook, things like that. So I guess it kind of can come either way for me. Either something that comes out of the blue, or maybe from a dream, or listening to a line of music, you know, something like that. But my books are both interspersed with also family things. That's my experience, you know.
Excellent.
When you grow up in an
what poets?
Italian family in Newark, man, you got a lot to write about. I'm just telling you.
A lot of endless stories, huh?
That's right.
Wow. Now,
Yeah.
what poets would you say get your attention? What poets would you say inspire you?
Um, well, as I mentioned before, I think one of them, at least right now, that I've been reading or going back to reading again is Robert Haas. I love his writing. Also, I think Mary Oliver. I also go back. She's passed away now, but I loved her poetry. And a fellow named W.S. Merwin. W.S. Merwin, also a wonderful poet. And recently also Lucille Clifton. I've been reading some of her poetry as well. So I think right now those are the ones that I've been kind of looking at. I also, because again, I go back to that word curiosity and exploration. I reached out to, I think, a wonderful poet. His name is Jack Riddle, R-I-D-L. And we became fast friends, even though he's in Michigan. And I've been reading some of his poetry as well. I find it spare and direct and beautiful imagery. So I've been reading a little bit of him also. Yeah, good people and good poets.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure you've heard the word representation thrown around, in different circles for various different reasons. Now, when it comes to you and your writing, how important is it to you that you make sure that you represent yourself in your totality through your writing? When you're thinking in terms of, your culture, your upbringing, education, all of your life experiences that made you who you are. When you sit down to write, when you perform your work, how important is it to you to make sure that you're representing yourself through your work in your totality?
Yeah, it's very important to me. I did a reading. I was asked to do a reading down at St. Peter's College about a month and a half ago at the library for their students and English classes, which was very sweet, a wonderful invitation. And I tried to cover all of those things that represent who I am. I think whether it's about sausage and peppers, or it's about transcending oneself and letting the world touch us, or whether it's about zazen. So all of these different aspects, or my marriage. I mean, there's a number of poems that are about our relationship, which isn't very, very important to me. And I write about that in a variety of ways. Also, our relationship, my relationship with my wife. So those kind of things that are my life, I try to speak to because I know them. I mean, it's me. It's me. And I want to write about my experience. And I hope that if I'm sharing my experience in my writing, because all poetry is relationship, right? Between the writer and the listener, right? The reader and the listener. So if I'm writing something that represents me, my hope as the poet is that I'm telling you something that opens up something in you about your life. That we make a connection that way as human beings, as people.
Right.
So I hope that I do that,
Right. Excellent. Excellent. Now, given the climate of the times, why would you say it's important for poets overall to use their voices?
Well, I don't know. I always think it's important for a poet to use their voice, regardless of the time, these times. I'm not a directly political poet. I think about human qualities that connect us all. Love, gratitude, relationships to people, to the earth, to each other. The common human qualities that we all share together. I think that's the best I can do to try to bring us together and say, what do we have in common? What can bring us together? And I tend to think about it that way. So regardless of the times, I grew up in the 60s. So we had women's rights, we had equal rights, we had civil rights, we had a war in Vietnam, we had all kinds of stuff going on. And now we have, different colors, but the same basic stuff about people who can't even look at each other or talk with each other or find what they have in common. And so my poems, I hope, speak to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And I believe that provides a perfect segue to the next segment of this episode, because now it's
Okay.
time, ladies and gentlemen, for Ray to take the mic. Now, at this time, Ray, you're free to do up to 5 poems of your choice to give our audience an idea of who you are as an author and a poet. So at this time, the floor is yours.
Oh, sure. Well, thank you again. So I'd like to read a poem here this is from the second book. This is called Songs of Love and Longing. And I will read one of them from that book. It is called Yellow-Breasted Chat. Yellow-breasted chat is a bird that's fairly rare and beautiful. So this is called Yellow-Breasted Chat. It was when we walked the lighthouse trail that we heard, then saw him, high in a stand of black oak. His call, a chit-chat, syncopated, chuckling whistle, like jazz improvisation that echoed across the tall grass and marshy fields. As that sweet stream of music carried out in the delighted air, a thought arrived about the harsh necessity that this life will end and everything I hold dear will pass. It was a strange moment because the day throbbed with spring light and birds soared overhead like angels across a brutally blue sky. I grew quiet and you asked if I was all right. I told you my thoughts about how these green days will turn golden, wither and disappear. How one day our lives will be just a breeze or a dream being dreamed by some dreamer. Then you wrapped your arm around mine, which broke my rehearsal of sorrow and loss, and we just listened. Marsh song, cloud song, warbler song, ocean song, the song of leaves. I thought, I want to live a long, long time. Then we stood silent in a clearing and watched as the yellow-breasted chat, high in a stand of black oak, took full pleasure in the moment, singing. This is another poem from my book, second book. It's called This Meal We've Made. There's an old Zen saying that I put here, which goes, the meal has long been cooked. An old Zen saying, the meal has long been cooked. We know all things fade away, but tonight my wife and I prepare our dinner. I wash the sand from the red chard, then slice the tofu thick and firm into squares. She chops the carrots and onions, leans on my shoulder to reach the olive oil and salt. While she sings her favorite tune, I hum along as I prepare the rice, and the kitchen is filled with song. We're married 42 years, I say, and she asks, so how are we doing? Then reminds me how she picked me up that first night at the bar. I tell her about the dreams and schemes that I will never do. She shares memories of friends long gone and how we look better now in evening light. We try to care for the empty spaces that linger in each other's hearts, laugh at our folly, that whether due to love or fear, we still dream of wanting more, though we know all we hold dear will change and disappear. So we clink our glasses and drink our wine, then enjoy this meal we've made together, and try to listen each day to what calls us to new ways to love in this fragile, changing light. This meal we've made. This is a poem called Yellow Bicycles. Yellow bicycles. My wife is still asleep upstairs as I open my journal to find a note I scribbled long ago. To return home, that's the ticket. And where is home, if not where I am? And all my dreams of being other places drift away. Sitting in a quaint cafe in Lucca or Rome, or at a hilltop winery with a glass of Brunello under a sun that won't fall. I watch instead the flight of robins and wren and two boys whooping with joy down our hill on yellow bicycles, free as sunflowers on a roadside field. I put the top down and drive to town for lunch and the hardware store where John and I laugh about vacations we won't take and how to grow tomatoes in our half-shaded yards. At the coffee shop, I sip my double espresso. I turn my face to the sun and am unburdened by the weight of dreams. Okay, I'd like to read also a poem here about an old friend, a beautiful old friend called One Shoe Martha. After a day of calm, a snow squall blows in, the world's a rush of white, house finches lift from red-berried thickets to the feeder, then retreat to sit on the hemlock's bare branches like monks in meditation. I'm at my desk writing these lines when Carolyn, eyes wide with delight, comes to say, let's walk in the snow. Boots laced, we walk around Birchwood Lake, and a memory surfaces of meeting Martha at a meditation retreat in Honesdale, Pennsylvania, where the three of us hiked through winter woods. Martha would happily take in and bow to all that was around her. Crows high in the trees, mirrored snow melt on snow, a few juddering leaves that are still stunned by the December cold. And as we hip hop over half-frozen streams, Martha loses her shoe. And so we called her One Shoe Martha. And on the way back, she sang us a poem. All things awaken as I limp along the path. Don't we all limp through this life in some way? That's what she would chant in her sing-song voice. And then she would say, don't pollute your holy temple, riffing on a verse from 1 Corinthians. For days afterward, Carolyn and I finally mimicked her words, don't pollute your holy temple. Home from our walk, I recalled the Christmas we invited her for dinner along with our friend John, who, jealous of her wit, made fun of her sing-song voice. But Martha only smiled and said, thank you. And I watched John as she stunned him into awareness. How compassionate Martha could be to another's limp. I bow to One Shoe Martha. And this will be the last poem I'll do. It's called The Turning. The Turning. Two men, faces emptied of tomorrow, sit forlorn like abandoned lovers against the coffee shop wall. Their lives stuffed in ShopRite bags. The older one turns to his friend and smiles and says, don't carry ShopRite bags. People will know you're homeless. A mother pulls her son to her side as she walks by, as if she could keep him safe from the news, as if she could stop this world from bleeding through. And I recalled an old Zen teaching, we live in fear we will become what we imagine. I remember too my friend Carl, who after deep meditation stared into the night sky and realized he was the still point, that larger rhythm that connects us all. After that, all he wanted to do was serve. And one winter went on retreat to Washington, D.C. to care for those who called the streets home. The annual homeless assessment report to Congress that year said up to 900,000 people were homeless over any given 7-day period. He walked past the State House toward lines of garbage, metal cans that were lit up for warmth. And as he passed a hut made of blankets and cardboard, he called into it to offer hot coffee, and a hand slipped out to thank him. It was like a single point of light out of darkness, he told me, that broke him into wholeness. Oh, thank you.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, those were selections of poetry by Ray Cicetti. Ray, thank you so much for sharing. That was excellent material, very creative, inspiring, and thought-provoking. And I love the imagery of your work as well. Thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellent, excellent. Now, at this time, we're going to shift gears into our next segment, which is our audience Q&A. At this time, we're going to take a few minutes to ask our audience. If you have a question or comment for Ray, you can unmute yourself at this time and give your question or comment. Don't be shy, y'all. Don't be shy.
Let it roll.
Well, you know what? I'll start it off. What would you say you would hope to accomplish with your work?
Well, that's a big question. Well, I'll go back to something that my friend Jack Riddle said when I talked with him about poetry and reading. And I've been shy about sharing some of the poems. Actually, this is a big step for me. And he said, Ray, what's the point of writing poetry if you don't share it with other people? What's the point? So I see it now as there being an opportunity to share and connect with others, I think.
Now, if you could collaborate with any poet, living or deceased, who would it be and why?
Wow. Well, I would go to actually a Norwegian poet named Thomas Tranströmer. I loved his writing. He was brief. He would take people down. He would, rather than going out into the world, he would find the world by going down into himself. And when he would write about falling or deepening or going inward, he would find numerous worlds by going down and into oneself rather than going up and out. And I found that to be beautiful. And he did it in such beautiful, sparse, clear ways. So if I could talk to anybody about writing and poetry and sharing, I would choose right now Thomas Tranströmer.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now, are there any projects or events that you have coming up that you would like to mention to our audience?
Yeah, actually, I don't know people who are listening, but I started in the same frame that I was talking about in terms of sharing. One of the things I started doing right in our town here in Mountain Lakes, which is in Morris County, and I wanted to support libraries. So we started doing a seasonal poetry reading called Poetic Voices, where I'm bringing New Jersey poets into the library, and we're creating a beautiful night of reading poetry, and we do it every season. So I'm picking local poets to come in and read. And we've made a nice little coffee house atmosphere for people to read together. And I've been very happy with that starting up and trying to get the word out about the value the poetry has. So I'm doing it locally, right in my town. So,
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And where can you be found on social media?
Oh, well, I do have a website now. If people go to rayciccettipoetry.com, you can see what I'm up to and read some poems. I'm not doing any other social media right now except some things on Facebook to get the word out. And I'm thinking about contacting some local coffee shops and things like that and going in and reading just for fun.
Excellent, excellent. Now you see where, now you see where poetry has been and you see where it is now. In your point of view, where do you see poetry going? And like in what direction in general?
Well, it's a hard thing for me to say. It seems like it goes in so many different directions. One of the things recently that I've been very happy to see a direction that it's taking is the work of the new poet laureate Ada Limon. Ada Limon is just put out a book which is about poetry in the natural world. And she has picked up and written and gotten 30, maybe 30 poets to write poetry about the natural world and our relationship to it and the value of the natural world that she is worried is disappearing. And I think if there's any direction I would like to see poetry go, it's speaking to that more directly. The things that are important to us that surround us, the trees and the birds and the land, and the clean air and clean water and things like that, I think is a direction that we're going in that's very valuable. So that's where I think it's headed. And she's spearheading it. If you haven't looked at her work, it might be valuable to look at some of what she's up to. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. Now, now in
Is it
terms of the
possible?
arts. Oh, hey, Tommy.
Hi. Is it possible to still ask a question?
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Great. Please excuse me not coming off camera, but it's been a mellow day and a very interesting day, of course, with all the dramatic energy here. But okay, with the earthquake and all that, so I've just been, chilling today. So I'd like to ask Ray, when we speak of poetry, what is your perception or concept of the rules and the regulations of it? I mean, sometimes I hear poets sharing their work and it doesn't particularly rhyme, or it also sometimes sounds perhaps like a short story.
Yeah.
So is there a particular parameter of
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I understand. Well, my poetry is pretty much free verse. But I do think there are certain things that make a poem a poem.
Yeah.
And it's the old, I guess it's the old adage, show me, don't tell me. And right now, I guess I can think of three things. I can think of the importance of diction, the importance of metaphor, and the importance of image. And those are three things that I think are important aspects in a poem that make a poem a poem. Those are three.
Yes, yes.
I sometimes, you can do a poem where if you want to keep within a certain standard, or you want it as a rhymed poem, sometimes that's fine. Sometimes I find it kind of limiting. And I like the freedom of exploring and doing free verse and different kind of line breaks, things like that. But I think those three qualities of poetry are very important.
That clarity is it. Yes.
Yeah, diction, imagery, and metaphor.
I see. So so free verse. is the opportunity for a poet to stretch out and be open and not, I got it. Yes, yes.
Exactly. But I mean, I think the downside of that is you can get lost in the weeds of that, you know?
Mhm.
You know, you can
Go too far out of orbit.
You can go too far out, and then you're the only one who understands what you're writing.
Like some of these quote unquote rap songs that I could never keep up with. So
Yeah, I
just,
can't either. Exactly.
yeah.
Say
You.
what? What?
Yeah, yeah. And trying to go back to something they said in the beginning to create a bridge to where they are now in the middle, whatever. Yeah, it's challenging. I got you.
Yeah, I sometimes worry that sometimes the poets become too self-centered.
Yeah,
You know, that kind of thing. You know,
I got
as
you.
I was saying before, you know, I think that for me, one of the important aspects of poetry is that when I'm writing about myself, I want the listener to connect to it. I want something to be shared. So that's been important to me, you know.
Yeah.
Without it becoming a short story. I think what you're saying is very important, you know.
Okay. Okay. I'm an actor, singer type, and I've through the years written a little poetry and thought to get more into it.
Nice.
And yeah, I was sharing with Noel that I'm really looking at picking that pen and taking it to paper again and getting into that. So thank you.
Yeah, do it, man.
Ashe.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, do it.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to do it. And if anybody questions anything I do, I'm going to say, Ray told me. Thank you.
Tell them to come talk to me. That's right.
Ashe.
I think one
Mhm.
good thing to remember about poetry is that it's like to a degree there's no boundaries. Like your poem can rhyme or it can't rhyme, you know, it doesn't have to. You know, some people assume that poetry, it all has to rhyme, and that's a very bad assumption to have, because that means you're only locking yourself into one form.
Yes.
So you got to see poetry as a realm of a free canvas where, you know, it's not mandatory that it has to rhyme. I think the whole premise to remember is that, you know, you're telling a story or you're conveying an idea or you're accentuating a theme or a mood or a feeling.
Yeah, that's right.
And the possibilities to go into any of those directions are endless. So you don't have to lock yourself into one form or one type of poetry or one subject. You know, you're basically writing whatever you feel, whether it's pertaining to yourself or to something that you experienced as an individual, you know.
Yeah.
So if you lock yourself into that idea that poetry has to rhyme, then you lose, you know, you lose out on a whole realm of possibilities or directions that your poetry can go into. So you don't want to put yourself into a box. You want to be free to express whatever your mood or feeling you have at the moment, and give yourself the freedom and the space to be who you are with your pen. And whatever you put and whatever you decide to put on that paper is a reflection of your thoughts and your ideas. So whether it's accepted or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you spoke on that paper, and if it resonates with you first, then that's all that matters. You know, the audience is secondary. And what I mean by that is, when you finish conveying whatever you need to say on paper, if you're satisfied with it, that's all that matters. You know, whoever is meant to resonate with your work, those will be your people. But you have to be satisfied with the work yourself, because I say you're writing for yourself first before you're writing for an audience.
Yeah.
You know, when you're satisfied with your work, you know, the audience is secondary, because, you know, we're not going to be for everybody. You know, you know, there's always going to be people that don't like our poetry, you know, and that's okay.
I think
you
if
know?
you try to be for everybody, then you're for nobody, actually.
Right. Right.
But Tommy, I do think that, and you probably have a nice handle on this because you're a musician, there is a certain music to a poem or to a line that you know, to rhyme a little bit with to make the vowels connect, to make something sing a little bit in the poem.
Yes,
you can still do that with a free verse, though.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed sharing.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, the work will resonate, as long as you're satisfied with what you've written, whoever's meant to gravitate to your work will gravitate to your work. So I say it's not about quantity, it's about the quality. You focus on the quality, and then the rest will fall into place after the fact,
Yeah,
that's how I see it.
yeah, go for it, man.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go for it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
But thanks for that question, Tommy. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
yes,
you so
indeed.
much.
Jeez,
Well, as
indeed.
we close out this episode, ladies and gentlemen, there's one more thing that I like to do, and that is to say thank you. As I wrap up season 3, I want to thank my guest, Ray Cicetti. Great conversation, great poetry, Ray. I appreciate you taking the time to be on my podcast. I enjoyed your work. I enjoyed our conversation, and I wish you all the best with your future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
Now,
much for having me.
oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Now, this concludes season 3. Season 4 will be resuming in September of 2024. And this episode and all past episodes can be viewed on the Poets with Purpose YouTube channel. For more information about the P.W.P sessions or Poets with Purpose, you can call me at 646-372-6230 or email me at poetswithpurpose@gmail.com. All of my logos and flyers were designed by the excellent team at Eclipse Graphics. You can find them on Instagram at @EclipseGraphicsNY to see samples of their work and connect with them for your projects. For those of you that wish to make a donation, you can do so through PayPal, Tap Media Man, Cash App, $anointed pen, or through Zelle, utilizing my phone number. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes episode number 21 of season 3. This episode will be uploaded to the Poets with Purpose YouTube channel within the next hour or so. So be on the lookout for that upload, and you will be more than welcome to share amongst your social media contacts. Ray, thank you so much for being my guest. Big thank you to my audience. I thank you all for your support. Have a good evening and God bless, and see you in September. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a good
again.
night.
Good night now.
Thank you. Good night.